So I made a video a couple of days ago about validation seeking, about approval seeking, and I was surprised a little bit about some of the comments or by the comments, but not in a bad way. Pleasantly surprised. I always love it when I find something that I didn't expect or whatever in people's responses. So a couple of things I would say about that. First of all, it wasn't just on YouTube platform. It was on other platforms where the video was as well. But yeah, some comments were like, I never do that at all. Like I never have validation seeking. I never seek validation. I'm completely aware of it, but I don't ever do it. I don't people please at all. And that was interesting. I I don't disagree. I can't know what happens with any particular person. I can't put myself inside their mind and see how they function. But I would be a bit suspicious. That's to get to the root of validation seeking, in my experience, takes a long time and takes very deep realization from the people I've seen who I think have pretty much broken the spell of it at all levels. But I can't. I'm not here to argue with anyone, and I can't really know what any specific person is experiencing. All I would say is if in your mind the thought is, I never do that. I don't validation seek. I don't see that in myself at all. I don't want approval or need approval. I never act like I do, etc. And you're interested in introspection, I would say, ask yourself, okay, well, there's a belief that says that, but where else could I look? What other parts of my behavior or what experiences could I potentially reflect on that would argue for the opposite, right? Because you won't see it if you don't look for it. So, for instance, we can have a sort of reaction formation to the need to seek validation. So we might notice that in certain areas of our life, we have a tendency to seek validation. So our response to that, our reaction to that, is to avoid those areas or set our life up or our relationships or our situations up so that we just don't even go there. This is really common, by the way. This happens often when we're young because the discomfort that arises with these sticky situations, whether it's in friendships or emotionally connected situations, family, romantic relationships, it's so uncomfortable that we actually construct a life around avoiding that. Like, that's what people do. Yeah. This is what I was getting at in the first video, but the first video was very broad. I didn't go into specifics. So anyway, that's what I mean by this. So it's the kind of thing where if your mind tells you, oh, I never do that, well, you might really want to look and see. Maybe you're doing the opposite. Maybe you're in certain avoidant patterns because you don't want to see yourself as a validation seeker, et cetera. So an example I might give is let's say a teen. This is just an example, but like a teenager who doesn't feel like they fit in. So then they sort of develop a style or adopt a style or join a crowd that is by nature not fitting in, right? So kind of go to the extreme and saying, oh, well, I don't want to try to pretend I fit into the social matrix because it feels inauthentic or I didn't fit in the first place or whatever. So I'm going to go completely to the opposite and I'm going to point out how much I don't care to fit in. Yeah, that's still validation seeking. It's just a different form of it. It's like reverse validation seeking or something. So that's just one example. I'm not pointing to anyone in specific. And we've all had aspects of doing this, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that there are two levels at which we have to work through this, like validation seeking and approval seeking. One is more like at the level of the persona. And my book kind of talks about this in the emotion chapter, but it has to do with developmental phases. So at the persona level, how we project ourselves outwardly in more like social situations or work situations. There's going to be a whole set of ways that we've learned to adopt and adapt to these situations and the challenges that are intrinsic to them, including validation seeking and all of what goes with that. Now, there's a whole other level to this, and I think even like neurophysiologically, it's a different part of us that gets activated when it comes to emotionally close connection. So when we're really close to someone, we're forming emotional bonds, people we're in relationship with, family members, there's a whole different set of behaviors that will become activated in those situations. There's the famous saying, if you think you're enlightened, go to Christmas dinner with your family or whatever, right? So I think Ram Dass might have said something like that. So there is definitely different sets of the behaviors, beliefs, et cetera, that come with validation seeking, with approval seeking in different settings, in different scenarios. And even in the sort of persona level of experience, it may vary depending on where you are. So if you're at work, there may be a whole sort of validation seeking thing going on, or a status thing that's going on with you based on your job, your position, et cetera. But when you're in a different situation, that doesn't apply, right? When you're either driving home or at a store or at a club or at the gym, like all these different areas of our lives are going to have different cues and different hierarchical structures of human importance and so forth, right? And all of that drives these experiences we have of seeking validation or pretending we're not seeking validation or whatever, right? So just understand that this is somewhat complex in that there are different settings in which this does shift and change for any given person. So again, if you're interested in looking into this, into yourself, just look in these different areas of your life. It's easy to look at one area and go, oh, well, I've got it, nailed down in that area. Like I have the status, I am the smartest person in the room, I am the one who people like, or whatever it is, right? But in these other areas, like maybe not so much. So again, you won't see what you're not willing to look for. And so when we're looking from really sort of universalized belief systems and so forth, like I never do this or I always do that, we filter often our ability to see clearly. So that's one thing I would suggest. Now, what I wanted to do in this video is actually just give a very simple and actionable advice to anyone who recognizes what I'm saying to be true in their life and doesn't exactly know where to start, right? Because it can be very, when you first start to realize this, you can have a total almost like your mind can go on tilt. It's like it just does not want to see it. It can feel very uncomfortable if you're not aware of this about yourself. And so even if you get through that barrier, there's so much material here. It goes so deep. I mean, it goes back to childhood, right? So it can be very difficult to know where to start, what to do, some actionable steps to take to become more direct, more authentic. At the very least, just to see what's actually going on, what's motivating you in conversations, what's motivating you in interactions. Why do you keep having the same sort of relationship romantically? Why do you get in arguments with people? Why do people tell you that you're angry? Why do your breakups always go the same way? Why do you feel confident in one area of your life around people and in other areas of your life you feel not confident at all? Why, right? So again, this can all be uncomfortable to start to delve into in yourself, but the great news is you can find the answers to these questions and you have the insight required. You have the discernment of mind required to find them. You just have to be willing to be uncomfortable, as I say frequently. This is uncomfortable territory. This is shadow territory, right? So what I wanted to do ultimately, and with all of that said, was give a few very simple approaches that can get you started and take you actually pretty deep into seeing what's actually going on. These are things that I would suggest to people who really aren't even on the spiritual spectrum necessarily. They're not interested in awakening or they haven't gone through an awakening or anything, all the way down to people who are doing deep shadow work and are working at the very root of reactivity and where it's rooted in your childhood, unmet needs, shame, fear of helplessness, right? These same 3 questions I'm going to give you, maybe I'll give you a few more, but I thought of 3, will be valuable at all of those levels for anyone. If you are willing to ask the questions, be honest with yourself about the answers, and look where that leads you. What are the implications of that? Can you communicate in a different way, right? Once you see that with the answers to these questions, that those are your motivations or your beliefs or your preconceived ideas about what's going on in a specific situation, once you see that, you're open to the possibility of having that situation go differently next time, of communicating differently, right? This is broadly speaking what I would call authenticity. And authenticity can go very, very deep. So here is a very simple approach. And I want people to let me know if they try it. Let me know how it goes. But this can be something you can work on for like years. So it goes a lot deeper than it might seem. So the context of this is authenticity. So it's relational. So it has to do with when you interact with other people. It can have to do with when you interact with someone in a very casual situation. You're at the grocery store, you say hi to somebody walking past them. You are driving in your car, you look out your window and you see someone who's homeless with a sign. What kind of interaction are you going to have? It can be how you interact with a friend that you know very well, and you fall into specific types of interactions. They may feel free and fun and enjoyable, or they may feel scripted or uncomfortable in some way. This can be how you interact with your family members, with a specific family member, or your family in general. How do you feel when you interact with them? Does it feel scripted? Does it feel like there's a lot of baggage into the way you have to communicate and how you're expected to communicate and how you expect yourself to communicate and how you expect them to communicate? Yeah. It can be your lover. It can be anyone, your boss, right? So this applies to any interaction you have with other human beings. So here it goes. Okay. Here's a question we rarely ever ask ourselves earnestly when we start talking to someone. And I've noticed this, interestingly, I noticed it like a lot of times in meetings or in large group settings or videos online when people are talking to a large crowd or a group. It's something that's sort of assumed in the way that we came upon that information or the context it's given in. There's assumptions made, but often the person speaking doesn't actually overtly state why they're actually saying it, right? What is the purpose of the communication? So when I started to notice this, then I started to notice it obviously matters in our interpersonal communications as well. And often we don't even know why we're communicating something. Yeah. So the first question is essentially, why? Why am I communicating with this individual in this moment? What's the purpose of the communication? Yeah. So are you trying to exchange information? Are you trying to teach them something? Are you trying to get information from them? Are you trying to bond with them? There's a feminist linguist named Deborah Tannen who wrote about this pretty clearly years ago about the ways we use language, whether we use it for report or rapport. And I think she initially described that men would use it more for reports, women for rapport, although there's a lot of crossover, of course, and we, all genders and so forth, and different places on the gender spectrum and so forth, we are going to communicate in both ways at various times. But I thought that she made a very good point about this. So that's just one example. But there can be many reasons we communicate. Why are we communicating? What do we want to happen with the communication, especially if we're the one that initiates it? Are we just trying to connect? Are we trying to give information to someone? Are we trying to get information from someone? Now, if we're really honest, we might find we have sometimes motivations even beyond those things, right? We might be wanting to get sympathy. We might be wanting to convince them something about another person, right? We might want them to see us in a different light. We might actually be trying to get them to see us differently, right? These are kind of the more manipulative things, but the truth is, it happens, right? Every human being has some of these tendencies. And perhaps depending on how triggered you are, how emotionally heavy the situation is, et cetera, there may be more tendency to do this. And then there's straight up being disingenuous, meaning you're actually communicating something falsely, purposely, to have an effect, to have a very real effect, but you're purposely hiding the fact that you're doing that from the person you're talking to, right? So deception, we'll call it deception. So all of those can happen. And everyone's had experience with all of them. So if you're telling yourself you don't, well, just look back and think of the examples because they're there. So it's important to recognize, okay, why am I actually communicating with this person right now? What do I want to initiate communication for? What's the purpose? Yeah, that's a really good place to start. Then the second question I would ask, once you are clear on your motivation, and this is like a muscle you flex. You may not be clear at first, but over time, it should be easier and easier to realize that, okay, this is actually why I'm talking to this person, or this is my motivation. But once you're clear on that, then you can ask the next question. Is this deeply honest? Meaning, is there a simpler, more direct, honest way I could communicate right now? Or perhaps I don't need to communicate at all because I realize that what I'm trying to get out of this communication is something that's unnecessary, maybe even unhealthy, right? I'm bored, so I just want to talk to somebody. Or I feel like gossiping because it's going to make me distract myself from whatever I don't want to look at or something like that, right? Now, I understand this is kind of heavy stuff, but if you look, you're going to see it. So, so again, the second question is, can I approach this conversation with more truth? Just a little bit more. Can I be more direct? Can I be more oriented to what's good for that person, what's healthy for that person instead of what I want out of the interaction? Perhaps you could say, how can I become a little more authentic, a little more honest, a little more direct and straightforward in what I'm actually saying here or what I want? If you want something from the person, maybe you just need to say that instead of hiding it and clothing it in something else. So that's going to take you a long way if you're willing to do this or feel inclined at all to do this. And the third question is related to the second question, but it takes it a little farther, and that is, how can I demonstrate unconditional love in this moment? So once we've first of all seen, okay, here's my reason for even communicating, and it may have been altruistic and it may have been self-centered and it may be in a combination. But once we see that clearly, we have the opportunity to see if we can clarify it a little bit more from the standpoint of truth, from being honest and compassionate and generous rather than self-oriented and muddy in our thinking and so forth. The third would be, great. Now, how can I frame this and think of it completely in terms of this other person? Feels like you're just giving a gift to them. Maybe it's honest appreciation for just who they are. Maybe it's gratitude for something they've done for you recently. Maybe it's just space, listening, being open, not planning how the conversation has to go to make you comfortable, but just being completely open to them. Yeah? So that's the third question. How can I offer unconditional love in this interaction or in similar interactions in the future? Now, don't hold yourself to like some extreme ideal on this. But again, if you don't ask, you'll never see it. If you don't delve into the motivations, the tendencies, then they will be unconscious to you. And if they're unconscious to you, you'll be often run by unconscious behavior. People can go their entire lives doing this. People do go their entire lives being unconscious to even what they're trying to achieve in conversations and communications with people. So if you take this out into the world and give it a shot, let me know how it goes.